All right. Great. So good to see all of you here, and I'm so excited to have our special guest Paolo Pedercini here today. Before we get started, I just want to mention a couple of other events happening tonight and tomorrow. So tonight, this evening, if you've ever wondered what your professors do in the evening, they put on costumes and they sing rock songs about old computers and exploding space shuttles and robots and video games. So if you'd like to see some of that, come down to the River Street Pub at 9 o'clock to see The Machine That Wouldn't Die with Professor Nathan Meltz. Right over here. Professor Sylvia Rosanka and an all-star cast of musicians and performers. It's an 18 over show, I believe. Is that right, Nathan?
Yeah, 18 plus.
18 plus. But that's 9 o'clock, and there's a whole night of punk rock after them as well, so that'll be an awesome show. And then tomorrow night, I want to mention this again, New York State Game Dev Challenge Work Night down at Tech Valley Game Space at the Center of Gravity downtown in Troy. This will be starting at 6 o'clock. This is just a workshop night for working on proposals for the New York State Game Dev Challenge competition. Again, deadline for that, the applications for that is going to be March 1st. So this will be a time to kind of get together with other people, workshop your proposals, get some tips on, on your trailer, on your game, on your design plan, on the mentorship plan, on putting together your budget, all of that kind of stuff to apply for that summer competition. So that's tomorrow, 6 o'clock down at Tech Valley Center of Gravity. All right, so today we have Paolo Pedercini here. He's an artist, activist, provocateur, general troublemaker. He's someone I've been showing his work in my classes for like at least 10 years, probably longer. And it's interesting because I was thinking about games and life this morning when I was sending out the reminder email that had instructions on how to find this building. And it started to turn into like a walkthrough for Persona or like an RPG game or something like that. And it made me think about the way that what we do in games is that we work with systems of rules and how you play and operate within those systems and rules and how you try to understand them. And how, in a way, that works because that's what real life is like. So Paolo is one of the people who makes those rules more transparent, those systems and power relations more transparent in the real world through the games that he does. So he makes games under the name Molleindustria. He's the creator of games like Unmanned, McDonald's, the video game, Every Day the Same Dream, and the virtual reality project, A Short History of the Gays, short in quotes, I think. So we're very happy to have him here today. Please welcome Paolo Pedercini.
So there is this thing that I did, Englishman, and it was great. And then I did it in Colgate, and it was a disaster. So this is the worst game I've ever done. 1 second. So this is blue flag, and there is a flag that you might or might not like. And the flag kind of lowers itself and disintegrates if you boo at it. So you don't have to. I mean, it's a free, free speech type of university environment, so you don't have to boo. But if you want to boo, you should boo now. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Paolo. I'm originally from Italy, but I've been living in the United States for about 10 years, and I moved right here to Troy without even knowing what America was. And most of my work is released under the project name Molleindustria, which means soft industry or soft factory. And it's a personal project, but I sometimes collaborate. And it's mostly a bunch of games, really. Mostly internet games or like free downloadable games. And you know how artists like to say my work is at the intersection between this and that. And I would say Molleindustria will be at the intersection of ideology and electronic entertainment. And I was wondering, like, how many, I guess this is mostly like the game design program, how many people like video games here? What? All right. How many people identify as gamers? That's not many identity. Oh, like, okay, interesting. Yeah. So yeah. No, I don't. I mean, I don't really. But and that was kind of like the starting point. I really like most of the video games, and so I started kind of making them. And back in 2003. So, but let me flash back a little bit. So, imagine if you will, a country ruled by a rich douchebag. A man whose wealth was coming from real estate speculation and fraud and corruption. So imagine this entrepreneur turned politician coming to power but basically pandering to the working class while pursuing his interests and his rich friends' interests. An openly racist, sexist man, a sexual harasser, a man who knew how to manipulate media, who said and did all sorts of outrageous things, in order to control political discourse, a black hole of attention. So that was Berlusconi, and he was the Prime Minister of Italy throughout, I would say, most of my formative years, and it really kind of sucked. You cannot possibly imagine. And what's even harder to imagine, I guess, is that this guy basically controlled the 3 state television because he was prime minister, but also owned the other 3 private televisions and magazines, tabloids, book publishers, and so on. So in the early 2000s, a lot of progressives and radicals were essentially looking for ways to challenge this concentration of media power and cultural power. And there were like pirate televisions and independent media and so on. That kind of stuff was happening. And I was kind of looking at when I started making online games, I was looking at the growing network that was created by bored office workers, bored students, and bored internet surfers in general, that all together sort of like create the sort of like the viral diffusion of content on the internet. Now we know that this is becoming essentially more powerful than traditional media and sort of integrated with traditional media. But at that point where this video was to sort of like inject radical memes or something maybe like a bit more smart and thoughtful or chattering into this flow of silly cat pictures and so on. And at that point, online games were that kind of content that spread pretty well virally because there was no YouTube yet. The memes, as in both cats, weren't really formalized yet. And I thought games had even more political expressive potential than one image and so on, than one-liner memes. And so I started making games about things that matter to me, like the Vatican trying to cover up the abuses of pedophile priests, or this one that kind of like anticipates the gig economy. Let me see if I can go back. Yeah. This one, or a very early one, is setting a future, which is basically our present now, in which you are a temp worker, and this corporation of temp workers basically set up a system of tubes or pipes that allowed them to relocate workers in real time based on the market demand. So one day you're a mall center, and then you get started and spit out, and you are McDonald's workers, and you jump from underpaid job to underpaid job for a year. And so yeah, or this one here, in which you have to take frozen embryos to researchers, and that was a moment in which pro-lifers were trying to ban stem cell research and so on. Or this one, which you choose your favorite deity and fight your friends to give vent to your religious intolerance in a safe way. And the gods are sort of like Godzilla size, and you're accidentally destroyed everyone world in the background. And was it a bad, possibly insensitive idea? Probably. But you know what else is bad? Religion. So this one I'm not going to talk about because it's about gun control, and I'm a bit upset today. So I still make this kind of games. today. This one is called Dogness, and it's a dog park. These dogs are really into eugenics, and you have to sort of selectively breed them to try to achieve the purest and the best dog that is really just randomly generated every time. And you can toss them out of the wall, close the gate, to selectively get immigrations and stuff. But yeah, so this Molleindustria project is really not just about doing satire through games or injecting politics into games. In part, it's about figuring out or trying new kinds of gameplays, because new ideas requires new forms, and so it involves a little bit of research in that sense that is not necessarily always successful. But it's also about messing with the language of video games in general, with the language of mainstream games. So about responding, reacting, questioning the tropes and mechanics we take for granted. This is a straightforward example. This is called Queer Power, and it employs the well-known visual layout of a fighting game, kind of like Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat. But almost every element is sort of twisted or inverted. Instead of fighting, you're involved in a strange intercourse. Instead of an energy bar, you have a pleasure bar, and you're giving the other player pleasure, and so on. And instead of this, hypersexualized and usually very ethnically stereotyped characters, you have this shape-shifting aliens that you can sort of they can change their sexual orientation and sexual organs and attributes depending on their desires. So one of the first motifs, problems that I had to sort of challenge is related to the escapist function of video games. This idea that more often than not, games are wish-fulfilling fantasies. They are power fantasies. Usually, play the role of, it's not mine, I wish I made that, that's a short yet. You usually play the role of heroes and generals and gangsters and even gods. And to some extent, these fantasies are making up for the inequality, injustice, and even boredom of our real-life systems. And so you can see them as a function of social control. Because you can say, oh, well, you don't have to fight for power and agency and fulfillment in real life because you have this surrogate, these digital surrogates that are video games, and that's kind of sad. But I would say at the same time, I think they are a sign that people, the success of this power fantasy, are a sign that these people are which is us, dissatisfied by the current systems, right? So maybe in games we can see a glimpse, or we can catch a glimpse of utopia, an idea of the world we want to live in, and so on. I have no idea what's going on here. I believe it's for a work of players working together to take down an enemy that is bigger than all of them. And maybe there is something interesting in there. Anyway, so I'm trying to complicate this relationship that games have with power in various ways. One way is I sometimes call it awkward roleplay. One way is to basically provide experiences of disempowerment, or putting players in awkward or unpleasant roles or problematic roles, precisely to point at the power relationships in our society. Oh no, another game about power. So this one is this is one of my first games. Oh my god, stop. Sorry. So in this one, you're basically trying to fake an orgasm to please your boyfriend. You're this woman, and this is a little toy that is supposed to help women to please their boyfriends, and it's basically a kind of a rhythm game, and it's not exactly a very empowered role, right? And it's basically a kind of a rhythm game where you have to press and hold and release to yell and follow his rhyme, and then at the end you should pretend that you. So this is a more recent one. It's called Humanities and Dream, and it deals with labor and alienation, I would say. I'm gonna play for a second, just to give you an idea. kind of a classic faceless white-collar trap in his daily routine, and you wake up and you put your suit on, and you're always late for work, and then you commute. And for most of the playthrough, you basically just press the right button and advance. Get stuck in traffic. The boss yells at you. Reach your cubicle, and you sit down, and the game goes black, and it starts over. And a lot of people are like, wow, that was so deep. But actually, there's a little bit more than that, because the more like, I guess, inquisitive player, the more curious, attentive player, will notice that there are some elements that are perhaps a little bit strange, or like there are basically some subtle deviation from this standard playthrough. And there's like this lady that gives you a hint that there might be something to be done here. And there are basically a bunch of things that you can do. For example, just out of the building, instead of moving toward the right, you can move to the left and encounter somebody. Instead of basically following the convention that the side-scrolling games always move to the right. Or you can get off your car and take a walk and pet a cow. And then you can show up where the pants will get fired. And there are like a bunch of like different ways, subtle ways to deviate from the norm, and then you reach a conclusion if you find them all. Luckily, I currently live in Pittsburgh. I teach at CMU. I don't have an office job anymore like that, so this is kind of like a kind of dream job. The school is great, but it doesn't really exist in a vacuum. Carnegie Mellon, as you might know, is an important, like RBI really is an important technology and research center, and we do cybersecurity. We do robots, all sorts of robots. We do robots like this one. Some robots are cute. Some of them are a bit freaky. Like this one. You can just visit our school and they let this thing crawl over your legs, up your legs. And some other robots just like straight up kill people. This one is called the Crusher, and it's kind of like a self-driving little tank with a gun on the top. And so because of this context, I started becoming interested basically in robotics and robotic warfare and automation. And also, as you know, military and entertainment technologies have been co-evolved since the very beginning. Like the first game, or one of the very first games, Space War. Well, I had war in the name, but also was created basically in their spare time by researchers at the MIT. That was basically a military research facility during Cold War, and even like on the hardware level, it was actually running on military equipment. The screen is round because it was running on a World War II radar screen, right? So, and now that games are regularly used for games are regularly used by the military for training purposes, for recruitment and PR, for even to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder. And I would say also that the current revolution in robotic warfare and drone warfare is often associated to the idea of gaming. for starters, kind of like visually somewhat similar in the sense of mini games, and its drone wars are always mediated by screens, and even like drones are operated by controllers that kind of look like game controllers, and sometimes are designed after game controllers to be more familiar to the pilots. And I would say that even on a moral level, the very premise of drone warfare is sort of to allow to fight a war at distance without suffering the consequences. So in a way, it's kind of game-like in that sense. And because all of this, I decided to make a game to sort of investigate the war in the 21st century. It's called Unmanned, and it's a narrative game about a day in the life of a drone pilot in Nevada. It kind of like imagines the daily routine of one of these kind of soldiers, and it even employs this sort of two-screen or like a dual-channel, dual-screen and dual inplay type of layout to sort of reinforce perhaps like it's a former solution to connect with the theme of disconnection that runs throughout the whole game. The kind of like this strange dissociation of a pilot that is technically on the front somewhere in Pakistan, but also commutes back home in the suburbs and so on. And so yeah, the story is told in a very linear way. There is no spatial agency. You cannot really move around, but you're rather wandering through the subconscious of your character, for example, or deciding the outcome of certain conversations. You're also shaping basically the character. You can decide whether you want him to be an Air Force jock, kind of like an asshole, or a compassionate, depressed person, so on. And you should like find yourself multitasking constantly because of these two screens. You choose to prioritize one aspect over another. In the scene, you're basically, since you're kind of like taking a break, but in the scene, you're having a conversation with your pilot, which is kind of your boss, while you're having, while you have to sort of stalk a suspect, a terrorist suspect, and you can talk about pretty deep things about, the status of fighting a war in this way, or you can even flirt with her. Information. I got too serious. So this is the life of Jesus in 10 seconds. About it actually, like it was more of an experimental reduction of how low resolution can you go, not just in visual terms, but also in, I guess, storytelling terms. And some Christians liked it too. So now, most of these examples are basically taking advantage of storytelling, role-playing, and those are important parts of video games, but it's not all of them. With storytelling and role-playing, you sort of get to see the world from a different point of view. You get to be confronted with ethical dilemmas that the designers forces you to face, and so on. But I think there is a potential also in a very different approach, and it's due to the fact that games are at their core systems. So this kind of like systemic approach. Games are, as you know, systems of rules. They are computational systems, and force you to approach them with a kind of like a critical ecological attitude, because their whole is more than the sum of their parts, and you have to proceed by trial and error and sort of like poke around and figure out internal relationships and negotiate their emergent behavior and so on. And I think we live in this globally interconnected world in which a policy in China can affect the daily life of miners in Malaysia or Mexican workers, in which you have a housing crisis in Florida that can jeopardize pensions in Iceland, in which a small change in the composition of the atmosphere can have catastrophic effects all over the planet. And I think demagogues today succeed because they are capable of providing easy explanations and scapegoats for this very complex structural crisis. You know, blame the immigrants, blame China, where people are lazy, global warming is a hoax, and so on. And I think our chances to fight back these dangerous and reductionist ideas depend on our ability to confront complex crises. And I think gaming and interactive media maybe can have a role in this because they can foster this kind of mindset that present complexity as something like an exciting challenge, as something beautiful even, as opposed to just a source of anxiety and uncertainty. So I started making this kind of like more like system niche game, and one day I decided to make a game for McDonald's. And it's a management game in which you do management things, like you create your pastures. You have to manage the whole production process of the McDonald's sort of system, and so you can destroy a rainforest in order to put cows and pasture lands in there, or evict native village and so on, and you put hormones on cows and so on. I made this without their permission, obviously, but that's because I wanted to include those things that you usually don't see in management games, that are the negative externalities, pollution, negative food, growth hormones, and so on, devastation, food, for environmental devastation, bad jobs, and so on. So basically, all the documented social and environmental costs of this fast food industry. And the idea was basically to recompose what the global capitalism sort of like makes harder to track because of these geographically dislocated processes. This one uses a sort of like a similar approach. It's called Oiligarchy. It's also another kind of management game in which you are managing a vertically integrated oil company. And the emphasis in this case is more on the relationship between politics and industry, I guess, oil industry. So you have to sort of like explore, find new reservoirs, and kind of like put oil wells and drills. But really, like one of the main things you need to do is kind of like befriend politicians so they can pass bills and laws that are favoring your business or allow you to expand to new areas and so on. And so there is a kind of, again, it's based on some like pseudo-historical events, and there's like a democracy mini game in which you're basically throwing a bunch of money into this giant robots that might not represent parties. And you can possibly make a game for every industry really, because pretty much every production process has some problems and some negative externalities. And I sort of realized that I wasn't immune either. We often consider culture, communication, design, gaming, the digital realm as a kind of a clean, immaterial sector, but under this clean informational surface there is a very material reality. And so I was thinking about this kind of stuff, and plus people were telling me, like, why don't you make an iPhone game? I was like, sure, I'm gonna make an iPhone game. And so I made this thing called Phone Story, and it sounds like this.
Hello, consumer. Thank you for joining us. Let me tell you the story of this phone while I provide you with quality entertainment. Once upon a time, there were minerals resting in the bowels of the earth. One of these minerals, called coltan, is found in most electronic
So it's
devices.
basically an educational game. This time it's not really a system-based kind of game, it's more like a series of vignettes, very, very simple games that were like sort of mirroring what a lot of like early iPhone games were, kind of like swipe, touch, pretty simple stuff. And the phone, I imagine, is like kind of like chatting on your hand in your device. So the phone kind of like takes a life on his own and on its own and tells you its own story. And So you start in this basically minefield, like you're probably familiar with the coltan thing, rare mineral that is on all the devices, all the capacitors, and then you move to China, and that was a moment in which there was a wave of suicides in the Foxconn factory where all the smartphones are made. And this seems like, come on, Paolo, this is so bad. this is like a bit too dark. But it's actually kind of like accurate because, when the suicides started to happen, Foxconn basically responded by installing safety nets to catch people falling down. So it was kind of like a reference to that. And then we move on to like other scenes that are pointing at electronic consumerism and the problem of electronic waste. And Apple didn't like got banned as well. And all these games are kind of like pretty clear in their political and satirical intent. The implicit goal is that I want to make, the implicit point that I want to make is that games are not neutral representations. And if you're making games, you're probably familiar with that. Basically, between a real city and a virtual city, there is a mental model of a city that is usually in somebody's head, right? Usually people that look like that, look like me, like white dudes, a little bit nerdy. And they have their own systems of values, their own biases that are inevitably informing how this process of modelization happens, right? And so I was starting to think that basically every kind of game, every game is representing a particular idea of how a city or war or a farm works. We're starting from this conclusion that games basically are playable ideas, playable theories. And so I decided to make more like open, playable theories, and I decided to get rid of some of the representational surface and make more abstract games to also disengage from the issue of realism and simulation. So this is Nova Alea, it sounds like this. Yeah, there's like kind of like a voiceover. So this is basically the first of a series of games I'm making that are trying to be a bit of an alternative to the SimCity paradigm. And it's a series of very small, relatively simple, abstract games, sort of partially inspired by Italo Calvino's Invisible City, collection of short metaphysical stories in which there are cities, but they're not really cities, they're more like concepts or conceptual tools. So in this one, like the idea is to isolate in each of these little games a very specific dynamic of the urban environments. In this case, the process of the real estate speculation and gentrification. This one in particular shows the city, or like this very model city, from the eye of a real estate speculator. And what you end up doing is basically like you want to buy buildings when they are when they're short, when their value is low, and sell them when they are high, before the bubble bursts, so before the sort of like their value sort of disappears because it's illusory. What happened, like, cities are also made of conflicts, and I kind of wanted to include some of the conflicts that you never really see in SimCity because everything is kind of like nice, or either works or doesn't. And so as you basically like gentrify the city and you're sort of like absorbing and implicitly kind of taking away life from the city, you start to see some pushback from below that is represented. I think there will be a kind of narration there. There are basically things like rent control or public housing or particular policies that are preventing real estate speculation. Yeah, like the little yellow thing is basically rent control. The value cannot go up beyond a certain point. That basically force you to adjust or limit your agency, and they are kind of like an indirect pointer to perhaps a solution to the problem of gentrification and displacement. This one is also a playable theory. It's called To Build a Better Mousetrap. And it's also a management game. At this time, I kind of like decided to make it completely abstract. so to not point to a specific industry or process. And it's basically an abstract production process under capitalism, which these mice are building, creating little cubes, generic commodities, and so on. And it's really meant to illustrate some concepts and like exploitation, surplus value, but mostly dramatize this sort of tension that you have between innovation and automation and unemployment. So basically what you end up doing is you're sort of negotiating between optimizing the process, so kind of like automatizing the process, and because the workers are sometimes complaining and they require raises and so on. So you have to decide whether to invest into robots or to invest into automation. You can also into robots or invest in new products to increase the market demand. And there's like kind of like a tension that builds in the people who are left out and unemployed start to sort of push up, and there are different kind of outcomes. So this is an interactive moment. So it's like kind of like a choose your own lecture, like a blue pill versus red pill situation. Because I don't have enough time to talk about both reality and virtual reality, so you have to sort of like decide. I promise that I have both interesting things to say about both things. Reality, let me specify, I have two projects that are not video games, and I call that reality. But virtual reality is more like me ranting about virtual reality. So we did the booing, why don't we do the applause? So who wants me to talk about virtual reality? Let's hear for reality. That's pretty interesting. It seems inversely proportional to how schools or how technical schools. All right, good. So reality happens. So reality happened, and satire died. And so I started wondering, what am I even doing? And what can I do as a game designer to, respond to the rise of authoritarianism and how to participate to the broad movements opposing them, opposing it. And the first humble response was this collection of non-digital games called Casual Games for Protesters. So they are little games that don't require really any computer or any prop really, or any preparation really, that are meant to be played in the context of protest, demonstration, occupations, and so on. Because my thinking was that often protests can be kind of alienating or scary or difficult to access for some people, if you're not among the organizers, for example, or you don't consider yourself an activist, or you've never been an activist. Sometimes these rallies and marches can be kind of overwhelming and also kind of formulaic in their structure and kind of boring, to be honest. And I think it doesn't have to be that way. I think participating in social change can and should be exhilarating, and it can be kind of like intellectually stimulating and so on. And so this project is a collaboration with a poet and performer and activist called Harry Josephine Giles from Scotland, who originally created games called Games for Casual Hikers, kind of like games that you can play when you are in nature, in outdoor, because it's kind of like walking in the outdoors is not that fun sometimes if you're by yourself. So like there's like more like weird mind games that you can play, or in small England towns. And one of the if you study art, maybe you might have heard of this Yoko Ono that created a series of I would say they are almost poems, score pieces that are basically like impossible games that you can play in your mind, or impossible performances that you can play in your mind, like that one. Another reference is the practice of situationist psychogeography and drifting, which has been over the years kind of developed by artists and game makers throughout generations as a kind of like a series to explore a series of ways and strategies to explore cities in different ways, sort of taking pedestrians off their predictable paths and forcing them to see the urban environment, the built environment in a different way. And in that mix, we also were trying to add something more tactical from the traditional creative protest. So some of these games are a little bit more like training, taken from groups like the insurgent clandestine army, which consists in dressing up as kind of clowns, but also kind of soldiers, and confronting the cops in a very completely different ways, using the practice of clowning. So this is an example, for example. So this one, it actually started from a tweet, like somebody which almost gamified this tweet. This guy showed up at a protest with a sign that says, "Oh, I have some charging cables, cough drops, ibuprofen, water, and so on," which is something that sometimes happens, and people. Often when you go to a demonstration, you forget like very basic things because I mean I do all the time, it's stupid. And so this is the idea that you have a bunch of medic, almost like the healer cast in a multiplayer game, and you're sort of like going around healing and giving up potentially away snacks or useful supplies, and you compete for who is the most useful in a protest. Or this one is more like maybe more along the lines of the Yoko score, more like a conceptual proposition or provocation that probably nobody will ever play, but maybe it's not super important. And some other use sort of like the landscape of a protest. They usually find a protest like involving cops or other protesters. In this one, you're sort of like looking at the line of cops, and one player is improvising a monologue, internal monologue of one of these cops, and aloud, and the other players sort of have to guess to which actual cop that monologue corresponds to. Does it make sense? All right, try it. Or this one that I always play when I'm in Europe, and it's called Woman or Concept. So you are kind of like walking around, you see a statue, a feminine statue, and you freeze and you tell all your friends or your partner, woman or concept. Because usually, like, not usually, but a lot of cases when you see a woman in a monument, it's not a real historical woman, it's more like freedom, Italy, that kind of stuff. So, you can play, you can play forever. Actually, when you start playing, it lasts for the rest of your life, whether you keep score or not. Or this one is also kind of like psychogeography. This is actually taken from a group called Hide and Seek that was based in London, and this works pretty well when you're like in the mall in Washington D.C. that are security cameras everywhere, and it's kind of like meant to make you a little bit more aware of the infrastructure of surveillance around you. So basically, one person is the hacker and the other person is the warden. The hacker sees a camera that points to the other player and can disable the camera. The warden can point at a camera that has not been disabled and say like snap, and so that's basically capturing the other player. So it's that kind of interplay. This one we can't play here. No, it's maybe not. Let's keep it. Should we play a couple of games here? Like, let's see how many volunteers. All right. So I'm not a sporty person, so none of this is about kind of running around. I also hate improvisation and too much touchy-feely things. So these are like really dry. But this one is kind of fun to play. It's a kind of like a bit of almost like an icebreaker. But I would need like something like 6 volunteers at least, or even more. Do I have some volunteers? Raise your hands. It's really super chill. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, come over here. Yes. That's where usually I plot this with the teachers so they can sort of prescribe that. I promise it's not super embarrassing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do we have another one? Oh, yeah, running away. I have another very good game for this kind of purpose, and it's called The Biggest Taboo. this one, in this one, we're not going to play it because it's not fun with students. But basically, you ask the player, why don't you sort yourself without communicating in order of richest to poorest by just looking at each other? And I tried it, with strangers in a gallery, and literally half of the people in the gallery, it was crowded, and half the people were like, "Fuck this," and it was Washington DC. So. Anyway, so this one, the power network, is super simple. It's actually a variation of a game for actors and non-actors by Auguste Boal, experimental playwright. So imagine you're this important, powerful person, an important of something like Davos or something like that. So make up an identity, random name, and some kind of nonsensical job like James Manticore, Director of Human Development and Resource Integration, Syncorex Inc., or some kind of politician. And the goal is basically to shake hands with everybody competitively, or sort of like the quickest you can. So you're introducing yourself to all the other attendants and shake hands and tell your name and job position, fictional job position. But the catch is that you can only let go of other people's hands when you have grabbed a new hand. So you always have to be connected, interlinked with somebody else's. Does it make sense? Yeah, so don't ever, if you find yourself without grabbing anybody, it's not good. So you have to keep count of your connection, and when you're done, you just scream power network or something, and you see who wins. Sometimes two people win. Don't we have one other volunteer? Yes, come on. I think it just works better. The more people, the better it is. Forever, sorry about that. All right, I'm gonna say 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. Group together, cluster together a little bit. Not in a line. Just form like a circle or something. All right, go start.
My name is Jordan Barnett. What's up, Jordan Barnett?
Definitely cheated and everybody saw you. You're always supposed to be connected to somebody. Anyway, that's fine. You can try every time. When you have a million people, it's even fun. Alright, don't run away. I have another super terrible game to play. No, actually most of this game are actually meant to be played in a scenario, in a broken scenario, so they do involve some more interesting context. This one started ones that kind of work okay in an auditorium. So this is called Welfare, and okay, so let's see if I have this is a game that costs money. Yeah, I think I might be the richest player, but I'm not gonna play. I guess I'm gonna subsidize this, and plus you're 6. Okay, so you want to hold this thing, this bill, yeah, like that, more or less in that kind of configuration. So when I say go, you have to pull it. And your goal is to end up with the bill or with the biggest piece of the bill. You get it. I promise. But wait. So the important thing is you keep pulling. We might split in two, but you want to keep pulling until you are the one person that holds a piece. Okay? 3, 2, 1, go. That was very fast. I'm very disappointed by this playthrough. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. I think you are doing okay. Yeah. So sometimes it's much more fun. But I tried it in Europe, and then I realized that the smallest bill is like €5, and that's not as fun. So be careful. This thing is so So bad. No, that's not bad. All right. So okay. Thank you very much. Okay. I'm running out of time, so let's just conclude almost here. So this is also related to reality, meaning non-digital kind of stuff. So I've been speaking and writing a lot recently about not just games or what happens in games or what they represent and so on, but also what happens beyond the screen, meaning how games are produced and consumed. I'm always I've always been a bit annoyed that both my games and games of the people I like are not really sitting comfortably. They're sort of like floating somewhere between commercial culture and fine arts, and that's an exciting place to be, but as a result, they sort of sit uncomfortably in both art galleries and trade show commercial events like expos and so on. For example, if you go to the MoMA in New York, you find Pac-Man, but it's not really Pac-Man, it's a kind of like a monster. It's like a MoMA-fied Pac-Man that is really trying hard to pretend to be a work of art, and it's all like smooth and gray and sad, and there's like a giant bold text, and it's trying to be like art. And so it's like kind of like modernist treatment, so you can take it seriously. And the other end of the spectrum of things, I think this is Axis or something, where you go and show your game, even if you're independent, if you're doing something strange and experimental, that's kind of where you want to be to introduce it to larger public and so on. And how you're supposed to play an art game, more like meditative game in a space like this, and also is this really the audience you want for this kind of experimental games? That might be, do you want the hardcore gamers that is obsessed with graphics and photorealism and so on? And so luckily there is a lot in between, and there are a bunch of venues and festivals that are now dedicated to independent games and experimental games, like Baby Castles in New York. But there are still only in a couple of big cities, and so I decided to basically make my own venue in my garage. This is a rare picture of me doing something that is not speaking or being behind a computer, but also not really working. I'm kind of pretending. I had this garage because in Pittsburgh, probably like New York, the real estate is still relatively cheap if you have an income and so on. And so I turned it into a gallery. And the place is called Like, and it opened this month, and the idea is basically to bring weird games to a non-gaming public and create a space where even weirder games can exist and can be created. Think about those games that maybe require alternative interfaces that you cannot really distribute digitally. And also to create an access for the local indie developers and artists that can an excuse to hang out. And it's a pretty small scale anti-institutional and sort of like community oriented, but it has been a lot of fun so far. So if you ever come visit Pittsburgh, maybe you can show up. We're gonna have one show every month, hopefully. All right, so this is all, and this is all the stuff you missed because it's virtual reality. Because I really have another third of a lecture if you want it. That's it. Thank you very much.
Do we have time for question and answers?
Yeah.
Hi, okay. Any questions? Yes.
About how many people work?
Wait, pass this up.
Quick, right that way.
Yeah. Pass the torch.
How many collaborators do you have? How many do you have? Someone as a musician or anything?
Mostly if you all the collaborators are creative usually, and it depends on the project. Yeah, sometimes I make music myself, but most of the times I ask somebody or I pay a friend to make music. Another collaborator was like like the Unmanned, the drum pilot one, involved a lot of writing, and I'm kind of like English as second language, so I wanted to have a solid writer. So that is a collaboration with a writer, and for example, what else? And yeah, but usually we are maybe like one, two people collaborations usually.
Any other questions? Okay.
Yeah. Quick. Thank you.
Hi. I was wondering what you think about the possibility of more subversive games like being published as like paid games and their survivability. Because I assume I don't actually know. I was assuming that most of your games were for free. But I was curious what you thought about more games in the industry.
Yeah, you can do it. Nobody probably was expecting it, but like Papers, Please, I think was pretty successful commercially, and I think it was good. So I think there is potentially a market. I think I hated to call it a market because you're very likely to just hit the people who are already basically like on your side. But I think there are like more like hybrid formulas, like maybe like a pay what you want, in which you have people that are that is free for most of the people, and then like if somebody wants to support you, like in each your style, they can do it. I think that's to me a bit more interesting.
Thanks.
That was really wonderful, so thanks for that talk. A lot of great work. I'm curious if you could just maybe run through your creative process, from initial concept to kind of gameplay and mechanics to thinking about an aesthetic approach. Within maybe one of your projects, whatever you want to pick.
Which one should we do? It's really like it depends on the project. Sometimes I just maybe like read a book and I'm like, why isn't anybody talking about this? I'm going to make a game and everybody will be talking about it. That never really happens. And sometimes I'm just like, just wake up in the middle of the night and I have an idea and I write it down and like idea thing, and then after like 3 years I'm like, oh yeah, that was a good idea. For example, I cannot really read it, but yeah, you don't read my ideas. Because some of them are good, but there's one, for example, like this is an idea that Alex is forever. It's like, why hasn't anybody made a Pokemon Go parody in which the Pokemons are growing and distributed on the basis of very important demographic and social data? Like if there is like income, like what is the Pokemon that grows only in gentrified areas? What is the Pokemon that shows up only next to a prison or something like that? I think somebody should do it. But yeah, anyway, so that it kind of like starts as kind of like almost like a bucket list of things that I would like to do, and then I usually prioritize the ones that make the most sense. So yeah, I think, and now since I think now maybe the process will change a little bit since I have this like garage art gallery there that is meant to have maybe like more site-specific stuff, but I also have no money to commission that, so I might end up doing things based on the themes that I curate.
Okay, I have a question, and that is humor. You use humor so amazingly in your work, and it's very powerful because you're dealing with really difficult subject matter. Do you want to talk a little bit about humor and where that sort of comes from creatively, and how you sort of you're approaching it from that point of view instead of hitting people over the head?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I still hit people over the head.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have like an exhausting answer to that. But I think it seems weird to me that the default, socially engaged media, the default mood is kind of like, aren't you sad? Isn't this fucked up? And which is important, it's kind of important, but maybe like there are other, other registers that you can play with, and some of them are actually not fun. I think they are all kind of fun, even like I really the same dream, although like a lot of people thought it was like super depressing or super moving, and I thought it was like, that's kind of hilarious, you know. But, so yeah, I think it's probably like the stuff that I would like to see, probably, the kind of like the type, but yeah, I'm trying to maybe like range a little bit more, kind of tired of being goofy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else have questions? Yes.
This might be a rather boring question. I do apologize for that. But this is a personal, just, you know, listening to a lot of game developers hear what they have to say. I guess from your perspective then, what would be your favorite video game, and just all time? And I guess what would you say your favorite game of 2017 was?
Well, I have a pretty straightforward answer. Because every year, actually, I put out a blog post of my favorite games, so you can check it out. Let me see what was. No, I generally don't have one favorite game because I think, I mean, I like different games for different reasons, and it doesn't make too much sense to me to just put them in. Yeah, so top 2017, let's see your time property. So, Oiligarchy Book 1, maybe kind of got amazing. How many people have played that? Well, then what are you even doing? It's so good. Bury Me in My Love. How many people have played this? Yeah, it's pretty nice, right? It's like a bit weird when your girlfriend is sitting next to it and it's like, are you still talking with your fake Syrian refugee girlfriend? Yeah, because it happens on your phone. No, but it's actually really nice. It's kind of like a journalist thing. Night in the Woods. How many? Yay, okay, good. I like it. And Scott is a good like Pittsburgher, and a lot of the gamers that kind of like very like Rust Belt, Troy vibe, Troy Pittsburgh vibe. Universal Paperclips, amazing. This one, Fidel Adventure and Rescue, you should totally play it. This is a really, I mean, design is not political in any way. It's a bit artsy, but it's like a really well designed, tight. Oh, sure, sorry. Thing. But yeah, so check them out. You can even go back in time and check the previous years. So I cannot control my computer. Okay. Oh yeah, Freeways. This is probably like, if I have to tell you like which one is the best game ever, it's Freeway. And it's kind of like MS Paint. Like you have to play it on an iPad though. You're drawing highway interchanges with your finger. And yeah, and you end up with like things like that, and all this automated cars are kind of moving around. Amazing. Rains that you probably know. For less things that was a little bit overlooked, but it was really nice. And Mortician's Tale is pretty interesting. Everything is going to be okay. Yeah, this report. Top Saw is also super good. Also another like a very tight little puzzle. Yeah, these two are kind of like more like brief. And actually, this one is probably my favorite game of the year. It looks like this. Have you played it? So it looks like this. I'm gonna press. Oh, I lost. Oh, I lost. So the goal is to go all the way. Is to fill the bar, and the interval between each click has to be higher than the previous interval, and you want to do it in the lowest time possible. So, yeah, it's amazing, yeah. Anyway, other questions? I can also talk about virtual reality if you want to stay here for another 20 minutes.
I like this job. I get some more.
Hello. In your game, 10-Second Life of Jesus, you said you learned a lot about making like low resolution games. So, what advice would you have for making pixel art?
Interesting. I don't know. What advice would I have? Oh yeah, good color ramps, you know. There's this guy that I forgot his name that has a Patreon that is a series of pixel art tutorials that are super like, let's make, this is how you do bubbles. in pixel art, or this is how you do like the 1 bit or like 2 colors thing. So I don't remember the name, but there are like some, I think the tutorials, since I sort of teach pixel art every year a little bit, and the quality of tutorials and that are shared online are really, have been really improved. So yeah, I don't know. I usually tell my students that is really a kind of thing that you have that has to come from your heart. I mean, it's just like, it's so, like pushing pixels is so hard, and you'll have like assholes on the internet that will tell you, oh, you just didn't want to draw a real thing, and so you did like a pixel art and you're lazy, but it's actually like a lot of work. So I think it has to be maybe in your character and your like type of work ethic to really, to really become a pixel artist. It's definitely not for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Use good colors. Steal colors from other people.
Hi, sir. So, I was wondering, toward the beginning of the presentation, it says, I didn't like video games, so I made them. Did you just like pick up a laptop and start coding, or did you go to like programs to figure out how to do it? How did you just start making?
I kind of like started via web design. So I was making like more like animation, interactive animation. In fact, that kind of like matches with the evolution of the tool that I was using before. Now my games are in Unity, but originally were in Flash. Flash starts as an animation program, and they're like increasingly became a bit more interactive, and it became a kind of like a language, like a scripted language that allow you to do pretty much everything you want. And so that kind of like worked in my timeline. I went to kind of like a pretty terrible graphic design school as undergrad. And then I went to graduate school, I kind of dropped, but I started, like the first game I made was actually not really, I wasn't really trying to make a game. I was trying to make more like propaganda for an organization. And I decided that I kind of liked making games, and nobody was really doing that kind of stuff. And so I kind of like, it was meant to be like maybe like a 2-year project. And I would never have thought that like 15 years later I would be still showing this. Yeah, feel free to leave if you need to go.
Okay, all right. I guess, is that it? Any more questions? That's it? Okay, well, thank you so much.